Thank you. Good evening and welcome to Rugby Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting this evening, Wednesday the 9th of March. My name is Councillor Ian Picker and I'm Chairman of this committee. The meeting this evening is being web streamed to the public through the Council's YouTube channel, and during the meeting, if you wish to speak, please use the push to talk button on the microphone in front of you. This will allow the camera to pan in your general direction. Before we begin the formal agenda, I am obliged to read out the following fire notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building this evening. If the fire alarm does sound, please could I ask that you make your way out of the building, down the main staircase and out of the main doors of the Town Hall and congregate at the entrance to Caldecott Park. An officer of the Council will give instructions on when it's safe to return to the building. Moving on to the agenda, the first item of business is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of February. Could I ask members to indicate by showing their hand if they're happy for me to sign those minutes? Thank you, I make that unanimous. The second item is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence, Democratic Services?
No apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3 is declarations of interest. To receive declarations of interest as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for members. So item A, non-pecuniary interests. Councillor Gillius.
Yes, Chairman. Items for applications for consideration, items 1, 3, 5 and 7 as a ward councillor, and item 1 as a neighbouring parish councillor. Although I must point out that I didn't take any part in the decision-making process or the letter into the officer.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gillies. Councillor Mrs Brown, and then Councillor Daly.
Application 2, we moved on, or we're still on 1?
This is non-pecuniary interests.
Are we still on 1?
We're on non-pecuniary interests.
No. Sorry.
Councillor Daly.
Just as a ward councillor for Hill Morton in relation to R210713.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Brown.
And as a resident against application reference number R210713.
Okay.
And I'm also speaking.
Okay, thank you. I'm also a ward councillor for R21/0713. Are there anything else under A non-pecuniary interests? No. Anything under B pecuniary interests as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct? And C, notice under section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992, non-payment of community charge or council tax? No. Excellent. So moving on to the applications for consideration this evening. The order in which each item will be dealt with is that the planning officer will speak first and present the application. After that, the representatives for the objectors, the applicants and then the ward councillor will be invited to speak. And after each speaker, committee members will be asked if they have any points of clarification from the speaker. Any ward member or councillor who speaks on an application as part of the public speaking process will leave the meeting after all speakers have completed their presentations. Members of the committee will then go into debate on the application, asking relevant questions of the planning officer if necessary. A formal recommendation will then be made and voted on. The rules for public speaking. Speakers have 3 minutes to make their presentations. They'll be warned by a short alarm when they have 30 seconds left, and then a further alarm will sound when their time has expired. Their presentation should then be brought to a halt, and no additional time will be permitted. All speakers should direct their presentations to amplifying the planning matters they have previously put to us for the benefit of the Planning Committee. The speakers should restrict their comments to material planning considerations, and non-planning issues will be disregarded. The speakers should also not introduce additional information that has not been previously brought to the planning authority's attention, i.e. introduce late items that have not been suitably considered by officers and properly addressed in the officer's report to Planning Committee. No visual aids or handouts may be used, and no questions to officers or members are permitted. No members of the public are allowed to take part in the debate once their presentation has been given. So moving on to the applications for consideration this evening, we start with R20/0259, land rear of Crossing Hand Farm, and this is with Joanne Orton. Over to you.
This application seeks outline planning permission for the redevelopment of the site to a HGV facility, including the demolition of an agricultural building, the formation of HGV parking spaces, fuel station, vehicle inspection station, vehicle maintenance unit, petrol filling station with electric charging points, convenience store, coffee shop, creche and overnight accommodation, along with ancillary parking and associated works. The application is looking at the outline matters for principal and access only. Access to the site will be taken from the A5 Watling Street. Moving on to some points of clarification. For some reasons unknown, when the description was amended during a reconsultation earlier in the year, it did not pull through correctly on the system, so there's just a note to say that's been amended as read out a moment ago. Within the final paragraph, a key change for paragraph 1.11 made to the application. It makes reference to 378 spaces, but it's been reduced to 293. The heights of the lighting columns have also now been reduced, so if members are minded to approve the application, they would not exceed 5.5 metres in height. It's also noted in the officer report that reference is made to Highways England, who have now changed their name to National Highways. In terms of consultation responses, in advance of Planning Committee, a further 11 letters of objection have been received from local residents, raising the following comments: the impact on the highway network, impact on landscape character, over-provision of HGV parking facilities in the area. It would be better located elsewhere within the region. The impact of HGV movements will have on property and residential amenities. There'd be an increase in noise and pollution, and it conflicts with local plan policies. Okay, in front of you, what members can see at the moment is the original site layout plan which was submitted with the application. When then, through negotiations, the revised scheme has come forward with reduced spaces and more enhanced landscaping surrounding the development, moving a lot of the ancillary units within the main one building there. I've got some photo montages that have been submitted. We've got, as within 1 year of the development down at A5, and then we also have, let's keep come through after year 15 with the landscaping coming through. Moving on, we've got some more from the public right of way. So in the background, you've got Magna Park, along with the approximate location of the development. And again, this is after year 1 with the buildings. And again, we have a further one after year 15 when landscaping has matured. And finally, another photo montage from the Lutterworth Road. We've got Magna Park in the background as existing and the approximate location of the site. And then after year 1, if members are reminded to approve with the development running along, and also again after year 15. So just a few site photos of the area. Got some photographs looking out towards the site from within the existing farm buildings area. Got some more. Then looking into the site from the approximate location of where the access would be. And again, looking further down up towards the site with Magna Park in the background, and you can make out the agricultural buildings there. So moving on to the key matters for consideration. In terms of the principle of development, the application site is located within the countryside as divided by policy GP2, and only where national policy permits will development be permitted. The National Planning Policy Framework highlights the importance of providing adequate overnight lorry parking facilities and taking into account any shortages to reduce the risk of parking in inappropriate locations and the lack of proper facilities which could cause nuisance. Whilst not supported by policy GP2, the proposal is seen to be compliant with the NPPF with the need to provide proper facilities for drivers' comfort and safety. The additional development proposed, including the shop, creche, cafe and hotel, are considered to be ancillary and would not have an adverse impact on the established town centre uses. In addition, there is a recognised shortage of lorry parking facilities both locally and regionally, which is evident with the NPPF and the Department for Transport circular. The government has also recently acknowledged that the need for planning system should play in meeting the needs for hauliers and addressing the current deficits. Therefore, whilst it's located within the countryside, given the strategic need for roadside services and facilities, it was considered that it would be unreasonable to recommend refusal based on the principle of development. Moving to highway safety, a new access is proposed from the Lutterworth Road with an internal roundabout along with associated highways improvements. Both Warwickshire County Council and Leicestershire County Council have confirmed that they have no objections to the proposal subject to conditions. National Highways have also confirmed that they have no objections subject to conditions. The information submitted with the application confirms that the proposal, if members are minded to approve, complies with the local authority's parking requirements. Moving on to the outline matters, matters in relation to character and design and impact on residential amenity would be addressed at reserve matter stage, when the following matters would be considered by officers: the design, scale, massing and landscaping. In terms of landscaping, whilst landscaping is a matter for reserve matters, this specifically relates to the detail of the landscape to be provided on site. The key concern for this application is the impact of the landscape character of the countryside and the surrounding area, which is a matter for consideration. The landscape assessment of the Borough of Rugby sensitivity study defines the land as being a sparsely populated area characterised by wide rolling ridges and valleys, a strong impression of emptiness and space. This is reinforced by an absence of roads and settlements, with sparsely populated hamlets and isolated manor farmsteads prevailing. Due to the site sensitivity, a consultation was carried out with Warwickshire County Council's landscape officer. Whilst the site is located within close proximity to existing ageing development, within Leicestershire, the site is physically separated from this by the A5. The Warwickshire side of the A5 corridor provides a continuum of the wider farm landscape and retains a rural and tranquil feel. The landscape provides a rural setting to the villages of Pailton, Willey and Churchover and the registered park and gardens. In this instance, it's considered that the mitigating planting proposed will not effectively limit the impact of the landscape character or the surrounding area. In addition, there is the potential that cumulative visual impact could arise from the proposed development due to the close proximity and scale of the adjacent commercial development. And as such, it's considered that the application is contrary with local plan policy SDC 2 and NE 3, along with sections 12 and 15 of the MPPF. In terms of other matters, there are no materially adverse impacts for flood risk and drainage, ecology, land contamination, archaeology and air quality. Moving on to the planning balance, there is a government recognised need for planning to assist with meeting the needs and demands of addressing the shortages for hauliers with the current deficits. The social aspect would be met through providing safe and secure parking for lorry drivers who have strict regulations to adhere to. Whilst at the moment it's noted that there is an ecological loss in biodiversity due to the enhancements that have been made to the landscaping scheme, at reserve matters this could achieve the net gain, which would need to be finalised through a submission of a revised BIA assessment. The development would, however, result in a permanent change in land use from a farmed landscape to an urban extension. This change would result in an incongruous form of development which would erode the continuum of the farm landscape within the surrounding area. The proposal would not have an adverse impact on highway safety. The development therefore is contrary with local plan and the National Planning Policy Framework. The recommendation therefore is to refuse due to the impact on the landscape character of the area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Joe. So we now come to the first public speaker who is speaking in objection to the application this evening. That is Councillor Barbara Dent, the Vice Chair of Monks Kirby Parish Council. Councillor Mrs Dent, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. The Parish Council strongly objects to this application with regard to siting, impact and need. The proposed site is wholly situated in Monks Kirby Parish, in open countryside bordered by the Greenbelt. Development on the Warwickshire side of the A5 will have a detrimental effect to the rural character of the open High Cross Plateau. Crossing the natural boundary, the A5, will set a precedent for future development in this sensitive area, making a fundamental change to the local landscape character. This proposal borders the Greenbelt, and there is little development at present in the area. The Rugby Borough local plan states Monks Kirby Parish has a deficit of natural and semi-natural areas. There are similar developments within 5 miles of the proposed site. At Durft, junction 1 of the M6, the truck stop on the A5 at Clifton, a truck stop and facilities including HGV parking, permission agreed in principle at Magna Park, and within 15 miles, the Welford truck stop and services on the M1 at Watford Gap, and Corley services on the M6. There's also a proposal for services at the A5 M69 Island. This proposed facility is suggested not to be a destination in its own right, but be focused for use by HGVs and employees from Magna Park. If this is the case, then such facilities should be sited within Magna Park and not across a busy junction with no pedestrian access and therefore more traffic movements. There are already proposals and an identified site at Magna Park, which will also be available to the public. Monks Kirby Parish Council has long been very concerned about the capacity of the A5 in its present state and its inability to carry any further traffic. As you will know yourselves, it is difficult to cross the A5 at the Gibbet Island from the A426 Rugby to Lutterworth Road at peak times. The Parish Council fails to understand how National Highways, Leicestershire and Warwickshire County Councils are able to assert the proposed development will not impact on congestion on the A5. There is very great danger that the rural roads to Pailton and the Coalpit Lane, which is exactly that, a lane and a sea road, would also suffer. The cumulative impact on the A5 in terms of traffic, noise and air pollution is a major concern. Monks Kirby Parish Council wholly supports the officer's conclusion that this application should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I ask committee if they have any questions for Councillor Dent? No? Okay, thank you very much. So we now have a second speaker, Mr. Lawrence Holmes, who is speaking on behalf of the application.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to start by saying that the application in front of you today is the result of 3 years of hard work by the applicant team to deliver a solution to the issues faced both locally and within the region when it comes to providing much needed high quality facilities for HGV drivers. As members, you will no doubt be aware that the A5 corridor has seen a significant expansion of distribution and logistics facilities in recent years, and this growth, particularly around Magna Park, is set to continue as demand for space increases. Currently, there is nowhere near enough overnight parking facilities for HGV drivers in this area. It is an area that lies at the heart of the logistics triangle of the Midlands. The government's own supply and demand analysis of HGV parking provision in the A5 and M1 corridors shows that it is woefully short of what is needed, with an average of 865 drivers parking up in laybys and local roads at any one time. The impacts of this can be seen locally, with laybys routinely blocked and residential areas feeling the effects. The MP for Rugby has met with the applicant and is keen to see a solution to the problem locally, noting concerns with overnight HGV parking near to the Rugby-free primary school in Coton Park. There's also been support and recognition from the Minister for Roads, Buses and Places, the Road Haulage Association, the Coventry and Warwickshire Growth Hub, and the Federation of Small Businesses. With the exception of Warwickshire County Council's landscape architect, there is no objection from any statutory consultee to this application, including the Council's Development Strategy team, whose response recognises the issues and in fact recommends that planning permission be granted. We have done our best to address the concerns raised by the landscape architect. In fact, the scheme has been revised 3 times to address matters around visual impact. This has seen the amount of development reduced and amalgamated, and significant landscape buffers being introduced around the site. Visuals for the scheme demonstrate how its visibility would be greatly reduced by the proposed planting, blending it within the landscape, whilst helping to screen views of Magna Park itself, particularly from Lutterworth Road. The largest building proposed would also have a green roof, further helping to blend it in with the landscaping around the site. The council, as a borough-cultural officer, is supportive of the approach taken and considers that the development would be sufficiently screened by the proposed planting. Despite the recommendation put before you in the officer report, we hope that you will recognise the need for this scheme and how it will address the issues in this area. And, importantly, that the landscaping solution now proposed enables planning permission to be granted. I would add that this is a very specific type of development to meet a pressing need, and it absolutely does not set a precedent for further development west of the A5. There are simply no other opportunities available in this area to provide the type of facilities required, and we therefore hope that you can support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask if there are any questions from members of the committee? Councillor Gillies.
Yeah, just one. Looking at the traffic assessment, you're probably aware that this council has been in talks with National Highways as regards issues surrounding the Gibbet Hill roundabout and the A426 junction, but your traffic assessment doesn't take that into account at all. Neither does it take into account the new motor services at Junction 1. Can you respond to that?
As best I can, Councillor. I must confess I'm not a transport consultant, but the assessment, it has been along a particularly lengthy approach with the respective parties, with Warwickshire County and Leicestershire in particular. Not only has that involved modelling the relevant junctions there, particularly the Cross in Hand roundabout, but also taking into account wider traffic flows. So they've actually produced a traffic simulation model. It's the Rugby rural area model that the county routinely use, the applicant has to pay for. And that has actually identified that all relevant junctions, and actually including committed developments such as the motorway services at Junction 1, will not lead to a severe impact on the highway network. All of the traffic movements around the site have been identified as being acceptable. There will be some minor queuing on the northbound side of the A5, but with the amendments to the scheme, we feel that would be acceptable, and importantly, that has been endorsed by those statutory consultees.
Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point to clarify. You mentioned that you'd been in discussion with the local MP for Rugby. Did he say that he was in support of this particular application or in support of high-quality lorry parking across the wider region?
Happy to come back on that. You know, he's not going to publicly come out and support a particular application. He was very clear on that, and I want to be very clear now. He does, however, and he is, you know, in meeting with us, and he didn't have to do that, he has recognised that there are severe issues. He was particularly concerned with issues at Coton Park, around the Rugby Free Primary School, and he's particularly keen to see further parking to address the problems in this area.
Right. I had Councillor Rabin, then Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question regarding your reference to green roof. I'm assuming that isn't just the colour green, but you're referring to the green construction. Okay, thank you.
For the benefit of those watching at home, the speaker nodded. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you won't get any name dropping from me, whether it be a baronet or an MP. But my concern is 2.1, the quality of the land that it's proposed to be developed. I notice it's high quality agricultural land. Did the officer take into account that it would be better for us to grow some things on that land rather than import stuff in lorries on that land?
Sorry, Councillor Sanderson, was that a question for the officer or the speaker?
To the officer.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. May I ask the speaker to just clarify where your point about deficit of current existing parking areas for hauliers, When you described 865 daily movements or vehicles being parked in laybys, can you sort of clarify a little bit more? Because it seems an alarming amount of vehicle activity, so just to help us with that one. Thank you, Chair.
Of course, thank you, Councillor, and it's a really good point. So a lot of the evidence that sits with the planning application is formulated not just on the basis of what we've looked at on the ground and not just anecdotal information, but actually what the government has looked at. So they produced what they called the National Survey of Lorry Parking. That was published in 2018, and the 865 figure was an average. It was actually 42% of all HGV drivers at any one time within the A5 and M1 corridors of the East Midlands. That is what they counted as drivers that were parking off-site. So by that, I mean that they are in laybys, they may be in residential streets, but specifically not in designated parking areas for HGVs. You know, so to use one example, Magna Park, for instance, they wouldn't be in there, they would be elsewhere. There's a lot of information in that report as to why that is the case, and I know that comments have been made, you know, particularly in some of the letters of representation around, you know, the adequacy of facilities as it is, and why drivers, you know, are not using those. Well, actually, if we scratch the surface a bit, things like the motorway services do not actually provide secure parking, for instance, for them. So there's a security concern. There's also a concern that they're not cost effective for the drivers. The overnight accommodation is perhaps more geared towards a domestic traveller. This is a very specific type of truck stop accommodation. More generally, the issues are acute. They're set to increase. The government has recognised the issue in 2 ministerial statements published recently, which the MP is aware of, as are others, and we'll be looking again at this issue and updating its survey of lorry parking within the area. So I hope that sort of gives a little bit of clarity as to what is actually going on the ground and where that figure came from.
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
Okay, I had Councillor Gillius and then Councillor Rabin.
Yes, Chair, I've got to admit, we seem to be drifting off onto all sorts of subjects. We're actually meant to be questioning the gentleman on clarification of his presentation. Yeah, but can I just say one thing, that I want to make it publicly clear that when I asked the question to the gentleman, he didn't answer me.
That is now on record. Councillor Rabin.
Thank you, Chair. Just one final question from me. You've mentioned Rugby Free Primary School and the issues that they face, which I'm acutely aware of. And we've also mentioned in the conversation the moto services, which are very close to that particular school. And yet, since that service station has opened, has not really seen any reduction in the parking around that school. So with the proposed site being a further 10 minutes drive away, have you carried out any modelling to predict the possible usage and how the new site, the proposed site, would actually attract traffic and HGV drivers rather than just simply still parking in the same place?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the analysis draws on the government's own data around that. It is, I'm keen to stress, it's not just something that is there to support a local need. It is a regional issue. And I suppose it really just goes back to the point earlier that despite that provision, I think that's a case in point, I believe it was 98 spaces, they've increased the HGV provision at the motorway services by. They simply aren't appealing to those HGV drivers. So it comes as no surprise that those issues are continuing, and that is because the overnight accommodation isn't suitable. That's because there is a lack of secure parking there, which would put put them off from using that. And of course, things such as the facilities actually there, they prefer sort of home-cooked food, that kind of thing that a truck stop will provide at, of course, the right price point. So I think, when you look at the government's own assessment of this, that is a key point as to why motorway services simply aren't as effective as they should be.
Thank you. Although obviously a road along the side of a primary school without any facilities at all, other than a bush to pee in, is basically far worse than motorway service station, and they still don't use that. Thank you.
Okay. If there are no further questions for the speaker, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to ask, what kind of charge is there for vehicles and will be using the facilities that you will be providing? And does that have an effect on, they're obviously on the roads, they're parking for free, so there's no cost at all. So does that have any influence on the use?
I'm not able to confirm the charges. Obviously, that will be set by an operator. They will be, of course, in line with other truck stop facilities, and will be a lot less. So particularly the truck stop accommodation would be a lot less than the market rate for a more standard type of accommodation that would, as I said before, appeal to a more domestic traveller.
Yeah, so that'll have an effect, really. If they can park free, they will do.
Yes, that's correct.
Councillor Watson-Merritt.
Thank you, Chair. Would the Speaker enlighten us on what sort of security hauliers are looking for by today's standards?
Yes, Councillor. So with this particular proposal, they would be within a secure area. There would be security on site, manned security 24 hours. There is a real concern, obviously, when they do park up in places such as motorway services, that there isn't that security. So vehicles can be broken into, are routinely broken into, and worse. So that is what we'd be looking at here. It's a 24-hour facility. It's something that we would need to provide, and what I would add is that what we're looking for here is an optimum rating with the European Truck Stop certification system. It's called Label, and it is within the, if you have time to look at the National Survey of Lorry Parking report, there's quite a lot of explanation within that. So we would be looking at the optimum level 5 for this, and that is a requirement of having that secure parking.
So, Chair, on that, extending on that subject, would it also be fair to say that then these in our planning application, or at least the proposal, that strict regulations that these hauliers would have to adhere to are part of that secure system? Or am I missing something about the strict regulations? Could the Speaker help us on that one, please?
Sorry, I'm just going to ask the officer to come in on that specific point.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Excuse me, in terms of the strict regulations, hauliers have to take breaks at specific times. They can't drive for long periods. They get told they have to rest at certain places and stop over and sleep, which is why they have these regulations to adhere to. And it's part of their
Thank you, Chair.
business.
I suppose I was sort of thinking along more of the lines of protecting local hamlets and the properties and manor farmsteads around there from HGV movements and that sort of regulation.
We're
So-
perhaps moving into debate rather than questions for
Okay,
the Speaker.
thank you,
and
Chair.
I'm
I'll
just
hold
conscious
back
he's been
for
there for a
debate.
while. So if there are no further questions for the Speaker, okay. Thank you very much for your time and for your comments. And we'll now move into debate. I'm conscious that Councillor Sanderson brought up something which I'm going to ask Joe to come back on before we move on.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the agricultural land classification, we consulted our agricultural consultant on the application, and they confirmed that it's grade 3, subgrade B. So it's not the highest quality of agricultural land, and it's been identified as having poor drainage and fine loam over clay soils. So in terms of section 2.6 of the report, this goes on to explain that the suitability of the type of land for cropping can be improved and enhanced over time when it's been drained.
Thank you, Chair. I was aware that land can be improved to make it more fertile, even if it's Class B now. It could become Class 2 with some working.
Okay, that is obviously not the proposal before us this evening, which is what we're here to judge. I had Councillor Eccleston, then Councillor Gillius.
Thank you, Chair. This is clearly a difficult one because it's widely recognised nationally. It's widely recognised by this council that we do have issues with lorry parking in the area. I mean, many times we've raised at council that we've had vehicles parked along the A5 in particular, and we've got the issues of human waste as well as litter and what is essentially fly tipping along the route. But listening to the argument and having a good presentation from the officer, thank you. I believe this is probably the wrong site for this. It undoubtedly need a site, but I think this is probably the wrong site, and therefore I would certainly move to reject this application.
Is that in line with the officer's report?
In line with the officer's report, NPPF and local plan, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Eccleston. Councillor Gillius.
Well, first of all, Chairman, I'm going to have to second that move of refusal there. There's a lot more to this than actually meets the eye. Now, as somebody that's lived on this planet for a few years, I've had lots of experience of what goes on in that area. And those of you with a little bit of knowledge of history will know that the site of Magna Park was in fact a Second World War airfield that was constructed in 1941 just as a grass runway, and then in 1943 it was concreted and tarmacked. It went out of use in 1987, and from that point on, Magna Park has been constructed. It's grown bigger and bigger and bigger until sort of the late 90s, early 2000s. It was the biggest warehousing system in Europe, and it's continued to grow and grow. But when the old facility was used as an airfield, we used to have traffic obviously going to the facility because it used as a maintenance facility for aircraft, those like the Vulcan bombers that flew out to the Falkland Islands in the early 1980s. But none of that traffic was flowing at night times. Now we've got 24-hour traffic flowing through our villages that have been founded in the 9th and 10th century, where there are houses that stand on foundations of that similar sort of age. When you've got vehicles going through those villages consistently in the small hours of the morning, people don't get a lot of sleep, I can assure you that. Living in a quiet village in that area is non-existent anymore. Now, the problem is we didn't have a traffic assessment on the Gibbet Hill roundabout. The Leicester Road, that is a bone of contention. I raise it regularly at Magna Park liaison meetings and regularly on A5 partnership meetings, because I sat on the committee that went about constructing the Western Relief Road. And the late Gordon Collett chaired that meeting, and I sat in committee room 1, and I heard the county councillor state to us then, before the first sod was dug, that this road is obsolete. It will not carry the traffic. And that's where we are now, in an ever-increasing problem of not getting the traffic up the A46, around onto the Gibbet Hill roundabout, and along the A5. It wants dualling all the way along. So what do you do? Now, if any of us have got a satellite navigation system, sit outside of Avon Valley School and punch into it Magna Park, for instance. Now, you think it'll probably take you the shortest way up the A426 and up to Gibbet Hill and along the A5, but it doesn't take you that way. It takes you the quickest route, which is through Newbold and Arbor Magna and Paleton and round Montelow Lane. In the office report right at the beginning, the officer made a slight mistake. She said the access was off the A5. The access is off the B4428. which in some of the reports it says B4027. That number doesn't exist anymore. It's the B4428. So it almost certainly will be drawing traffic from around the area. Remember, we've still got to build out the Southwest Rugby, and any vehicles wanting to go north, they've got to go up the Western Relief Road, and if they find a bottleneck, what do? They cut through the villages. I'll leave it at that, Chairman, but we've got a major problem with traffic, and this will only draw more traffic into that area.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies, as always. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I agree with what Councillor Eccleston said. I do recognise that we have a problem in this country, that we do need a high standard of lorry parking. However, as is stated in the officer's report, I don't think this development is a sustainable development. I think it will have an adverse impact on the character and appearance of the countryside and the wider landscape, and that's why I'll be supporting Councillor Eccleston and Councillor Gillies in refusing this application.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. Councillor Gillies.
Yes, I failed to make one point, Chairman, and I'll tell you that a number of parishioners attend what's called the Magna Park Liaison Committee, where GLP, or the people that own the site, tell us what's going on, and we try to work together to try and resolve any issues and problems. But I've got to tell you that there's planning permissions already in line to put at least 2 facilities, HGV facilities, on the Magna Park of the A5 to accommodate all the traffic that goes in and out of Magna Park, that's HGV traffic, and spare spaces beside. So there will be proper facilities there to accommodate the needs for traffic moving up and down, HGV traffic moving up and down the A5.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. I have Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is very simple, and I refer to the officer's report at 15.2. The final sentence, the harm caused to the environment cannot be mitigated through the benefits which the proposal brings. Never a truer word spoken, and in light of that I will be supporting Councillor Eccleston and Councillor Gillies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Willis. Are there any further speakers on this application? Okay. I mean, from my perspective, I think it's one of those situations where we agree that something must be done, but simply because this is something, it doesn't mean that this should be done. So I think I will be supporting the officer's recommendation also. With that in mind, we had refusal in line with the officer's report proposed by Councillor Eccleston and seconded by Councillor Gillies. Could I ask all those in favour of that recommendation to raise their hands? Thank you very much. I make that unanimous. Okay. So moving on to the second application for consideration this evening, which is R21/0713 25 Barbie Lane, and this is also with Joe Orton. Joe, over to you.
This application seeks outline planning permission for the erection of 5 dwellings. Again, this is outline for considering the principal and the access only. Access to the development would be taken from Barbie Lane. So in front of you, members can see the proposed site layout, which has got the existing properties down the Barbie Lane, flowing through to the existing dwelling house. An additional 1 would be fronting that, and then 4 off the proposed new access road. So looking at some site photos, we've got a photo looking down the site towards the existing conifers, and you can just see the existing dwelling house in the background. I have another site looking across the Rainsbrook Valley. Photo of the access. And then another one taken in the location of where the neighbouring properties are. Okay, moving on to the key issues for this application. As the application site is located within the Rugby town, it is classed as the most sustainable location for the development and therefore complies with the principle in general terms. The main issue is the impact on the Rainsbrook Valley. The application site is located within Zone 17J of the Rainsbrook Valley. The sensitivity study states that there is some scope for development within this zone, providing that the existing landscape structure of hedgerows and trees are retained and enhanced to ensure that the development is not visually obstructive. A number of applications will be shown on the next slide in purple. These ones were refused on how the proposals relate to the existing pattern of development within the area, with some further applications shown in yellow, which were refused on landscape grounds and the impact on the Rainsbrook Valley. Section 6.5 of the Officer Report emphasises the importance of the landscape enhancements being incorporated into the scheme. These improvements would be secured at reserve matter stage and through conditions 15 and 16. So as you can, members can see in front of you, hopefully this has brought, oh no, it's not brought the laser on, apologies for that, but these are the applications in purple which were refused on the landscape character grounds. Key reason being that development in those locations at the time, there was nothing else surrounding it, and they would be stand out within the character of the area. And then you've got the yellow applications, which were for new residential developments. These were refused due to the impact on the Rainsbrook Valley as they encroach into the high sensitivity area, which is the area shown in red. In terms of the layout, whilst it is a matter for reserve matters, the application site is capable of accommodating 5 new dwellings. The proposal has been designed so that it would read in conjunction with the development of Westwood Road, which is over the lane and results in an end to the development within that area. Again, whilst consideration for the reserve matters, the layout has been amended to ensure that the first unit acts as a continuation of Barbie Lane, with the remainder of the dwellings being positioned to ensure key frontages throughout the development. In terms of highway safety, access to the site will be taken from Barbie Lane. Warwickshire County Council Highways Authority have confirmed that they have no objections to the proposal, subject to appropriate conditions and informatives. The layout submitted with the application indicates that the proposal will comply with the local authority's parking requirements. In terms of other outline matters, character and design and impact on residential amenity will be addressed at reserve matters stage, when officers would also be considering design, scale, massing and landscaping. In terms of other matters, there are no materially adverse impacts for landscaping, ecology, land contamination, archaeology and air quality. Moving on to the planning balance, the proposal is located within the Rugby town, as such is the most sustainable location for development. The scheme would bring a number of benefits, including the provision of dwellings to the local stock and associated benefits to the economy. The net loss in biodiversity would be mitigated against through the completion of Section 106 agreement seeking an appropriate contribution. The proposal would not have an adverse impact on highway safety, and the development complies with the Rugby local plan policies and the MPPF. The recommendation, therefore, is approved subject to conditions, informatives and the completion of a Section 106 agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Joe. So we have 2 speakers on this application as well. Firstly, speaking in objection, we have Councillor Mrs Brown, who this evening is speaking in her capacity as a local resident. Councillor Mrs Brown, your 3 minutes start now.
Thank you. The proposals obviously have got a massive impact on the aspect of properties in Fellows Way. The illustrative plan shows plots but right up to existing houses, which currently have an open aspect. And I know that nobody owns a view, but the character and aspects of houses on Fellows Way will be affected to such a radical extent that I believe it becomes a material consideration. A recent request for a similar infill in a neighbouring property was turned down for these reasons, and that proposal actually affected fewer houses than this one does. Infills aren't part of the housing strategy in Rugby's local plan. Given that Rugby's the fastest developing town in the West Midlands and possibly in the country now, random infill building puts impossible pressure on a local infrastructure and already we can't keep up with the demand in Rugby. It may seem as if 5 houses in the first instance will have very little impact, but the plan mentions developing another 5 at a later date and actually identifies the potential to build into neighbouring gardens as a plus. This is a good thing to them. So the intention to extend the development is clear. If this is agreed, it becomes a gateway to extending development across the land to the east of Fellows Way, encroaching on the Rainsbrook Valley on its edge, which was the subject of previous refusals and protection assurances from the Secretary of State. A precedent is set not only for other infills, but also for a clean sweep of building into the farmland abutting the eastern border of the property, and the potential impact on the ecology of the area could be devastating. Infrastructure, as I've said, can't keep up with current developments. We're playing catch up with schools, hospitals, surgeries, ambulances, roads, all the rest of it. So it's vital that developments are planned in and not haphazard. 106 funds won't touch the infrastructure that's needed to support the development that could grow from this. The Council's supplementary planning document gives an assessment of the housing needs of Rugby, and it shows a plethora of houses of this kind. There isn't a shortage. The established builds in Hillmorton, new builds in Little Morton, and significant builds in Holton and along Ashlawn Road all contain a plethora of this kind of housing. This kind of speculative development is not the way forward for sustainable housing. Rugby does need houses, but these are the wrong ones and they're in the wrong place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mrs Brown. Councillor Daly.
Just a quick question. Can you just describe, in your opinion, the impact that this development would have on residents in Fellows Way?
The view, obvious. Sorry. Okay.
Carry on.
Clearly, it's an impact on the feel of the place, the character, the way in which we live a rural life on that edge of the town. It's really important to us. There's a lot of wildlife there as well, which seems to have just been overlooked here. So we have got, we've got the best of both worlds, I think, there. The character would be massively impacted on through this. Sounds selfish, doesn't it? But it's true. It's true.
Thank you. Councillor Sanderson, a question from Councillor Mrs Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the Rainsbrook Valley, it's clearly identified as being of a very highly sensitive nature. If we were to let this development go, do you feel that others would then pile in behind it?
Without a shadow of a doubt, I think that even though I know that we consider each application separately on its own merits, I know that if this goes, then others will follow because there will be nothing to stop it. And quite rightly, a developer could say, well, it's there, it's the same situation, why isn't it happening here and here and here? And it will spread right the way along.
Thank you, Councillor Ray.
Okay.
Can I ask if there are any further questions for Councillor Mrs Brown? No? Okay. Thank you very much. And we now have a second speaker in her capacity as a ward councillor. And this is Councillor Miss Lawrence. Councillor Miss Lawrence, you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I have to say that I have a real sense of déjà vu, as over the years I have consistently spoken out in defence of our local landscape and consistently resisted intrusive development that is not in keeping with our local landscape and area. There are sound reasons why this application should be refused, and I refer committee to the very eloquent and detailed objections raised by the local residents and by Councillor Mrs Brown. One, it's contrary to the NPPF section 15, paragraph 170, which clearly sets out that planning policies and decisions should contribute to and enhance the natural and local environment by protecting and enhancing valued landscapes. 2, as a local authority, our housing quotas can be met, and GP2 paragraph 410 sets out the targets, which is more than met with the developments at Halton and the other areas. 3, contrary to RBC's local plan policy NE1. 4, contrary to RBC's local plan policy NE2, which seeks to protect green infrastructure assets. 5, it's contrary to RBC's local plan policy NE3, which requires new development to positively contribute to the landscape character. 6, NE3 paragraph 9.15 states that the purpose of policy NE3 is to ensure that significant landscape features are protected and enhanced, and cites the Rainsbrook Valley Landscape Sensitivity Study, which states that the escarpment should be safeguarded from development. 7, infrastructure. The report makes no reference to education provision. A significant proportion of Hillmorton parents fail to enrol their children in the local primary and secondary schools, and due to these properties being significantly closer to schools, there would be priority to incoming families at the expense of existing Hillmorton families. This is neither fair nor acceptable. And finally, since 2015, committee has taken a consistent approach in refusing previous applications. The officer's report gives details of previous applications to develop in this area, which have been consistently refused by committee. I draw committee's attention to R17/0431 at 23 Barbie Lane and the 2 reasons given by committee, in direct contrast to the existing pattern of development in the area and the adverse impact on neighbours. R17/1891, which supplanted that, the reason for refusal was supported at appeal and the appeal dismissed. The photographs clearly show that this impacts on the Rainsbrook Valley, and therefore I urge committee to consider the reasons I've outlined and recommend refusal on this application. Thank you, committee.
Thank you, Councillor Miss Lawrence. Could I ask committee if they have any questions for Councillor Miss Lawrence? Okay. Oh, Councillor McQueen.
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to get some clarification, really. So the site of the proposed dwellings being built, the 5 houses being built, that's on an existing residential property in the garden rather than farmland or open countryside. Is that correct?
But if you pull up the photograph that the officer showed you, and you show that it is absolutely adjacent to the landscape of the Rainsbrook Valley. And as Councillor Mrs Brown has eloquently pointed out, that this would just be a step which would take it into the landscape, and therefore once you start encroaching on it, it sets a precedent for development, which is not acceptable in our area.
For the benefit of the committee, I'll ask the officer to pull up the photograph which was referred to.
Thank you, Chair. The photograph quite clearly shows that although this is in part of a garden of a property, it is absolutely part of the Rainsbrook landscape because it abuts all of that green area there. And you can also see how it impacts on Fellows Way, which is what Councillor Mrs Brown was explaining.
Questions in line with the Council's constitution. I'm afraid I am going to have to ask both Councillor Mrs Brown and Councillor Miss Lawrence to leave the room before we go into debate. So I have Councillor Sanderson first.
Thank you, Chair. Given this application careful consideration and with the knowledge of the previous applications that came before this committee, I'd like to move refusal on the grounds that it encroaches upon the landscape sensitive area of the Rainsbrook Valley. For some years now, some of us have wanted to see that area become a countryside parkland with only limited development on individual properties that sit within that landscape, rather than have this battle every time an application comes in, because it doesn't matter if it's 5% of the land or 10% of the land or 15% of the land. Within time, we will lose that very precious and very sensitive landscape area in Rugby. It is the buffer zone that stops us gobbling up Dunchurch, gobbling up the next village after that. We must fight to preserve this important and sensitive landscape area, and that no's got to really mean no in terms of development within that landscape.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Sanderson. Just for a point of clarification, you're moving refusal based on the sensitivity of the Wainsbrook Valley area. So we're referring to the MPPF section 15, paragraph 20, I believe it is. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Daly.
I actually disagree with Councillor Sanderson in part, because I think we have done enough to prevent development in this area. We had the Wainsbrook Valley Landscape Sensitivity Study, and this area was designated as having a high-medium sensitivity. So, you know, in line with what Councillor Sanderson said, I would second refusal on this on the grounds that he laid out.
Thank you very much, Councillor Daly. Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all. I'm going to sound like a broken record again, but once again we have an infill site and the issue of ingress-egress. My usual, although I can't join site visits, I spent Sunday afternoon doing the same and visited this site. Opposite, you have Westwood Road. I have fond memories because as a child that's where I lived, moved before the World Cup was won in 1966, so visited it. It is a single track road and directly opposite the site we're looking at. So the ingress and egress from Westwood Road matched with what is proposed at Barbie Lane at 25 is going to cause considerable problems, I would suggest, and I'm surprised that once again Warwickshire County Council Highways Department have not objected. We're seeing more and more of these coming forward for infills. The infrastructure, notwithstanding what Councillors Sanderson and Daly have pointed out in line with our speakers, but I have an issue with the parking and the ingress-egress on any of these infill sites. If 25 is approved, what's to stop 23 and then 21 as we move further back towards Ashlawn Road? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Willis. Any further speakers on this application? Councillor Gillis?
Yeah, just to say that I remember on the Crick Road, Hill Morton, the first sort of backland development that came forward, and at the time then I said we're going to be losing some unique dwellings along here because this will almost certainly set a precedent, and it did. There must be 7 or 8 of those backland developments along the Crick Road now. But yes, what's been said, I know the officers have made a good report, and then, you know, 99 times out of 100 that would be approved and go through. But I think because of this sensitivity, I think that's you know, a problem.
Thank you. Councillor Eccleston.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I agree with Councillor Sanderson in terms of the sensitivity of this particular site and of some of my colleagues on the committee here. However, his comment on Dunchurch, unfortunate. I think Dunchurch has already been subsumed by planning permission, as we've seen recently with the South West Rugby plans. So I mean, subjectively, you know, there were subjective comments made about future development on this site and surrounding sites, etc. I think that's pure speculation, quite honestly. However, I will be supporting Councillor Sanderson tonight because I do believe that the ecology and biodiversity is extremely important to us, and that Wainsbrook Valley, I think, is particularly beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. I would agree with the comments that have been made this evening. I think it is important that we retain the green landscaping in the Wainsbrook Valley. I think what's interesting about this proposal is also that it's not truly in character with the rest of Barbie Lane. I think if we were looking at 2 dwellings that continued that frontage facing, that might be a different discussion, but this isn't that. It's incongruous with the local area. So I will be supporting Councillor Sanderson's recommendation. Could I ask if there are any further comments? Nope. Okay, so we have refusal proposed by Councillor Sanderson and seconded by Councillor Daly on MPPF section 15, paragraph 20. Can I ask all those in... Sorry. Richard?
Sorry, can I just clarify what paragraph referring to in the MPPF? Because it's section 15, and then we start with paragraph 174 going forwards.
Into the landscape area. This is the centre of the landscape area.
Okay, yeah, section 15 is conserving and enhancing natural environments. I assume what you're concerned about is it contradicts that section. Yes. Okay, thank you for the clarity.
Okay, so can I ask all those in favour of that recommendation to raise their hands, please? I make that unanimous. Okay. And I will now ask Legal Services to allow Councillor Mrs Brown to return to the committee. Whilst Councillor Mrs Brown is returned to us, can I just suggest to committee that as we've already been going for over an hour and we have 4 further applications for consideration, that we take the next application and then adjourn for a short moment. Is everyone happy with that? Okay. Just to confirm for Councillor Mrs Brown's benefit, that application was refused. Okay, so we now come to the third application this evening, which is R21/0845, Land North of Airfield Drive, Coomfields, and this is again with Joe Orton.
So this application seeks full planning permission for...
Prior to installation of air source heat pumps, it shall be demonstrated that the noise from such plant will not adversely
Apologies if any of that came over the live stream. I think there was a minor technical glitch. Joe, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks full planning permission for the temporary period of 3 years to provide 2 proof of concept research vehicles comprising the erection of a temporary structure and 1 sample easel, together with associated access infrastructure and landscape improvements. Access to the site is provided either via the M6 or the M69 and is located within the MTC campus for both pedestrians and vehicle access via Airfield Drive. So in front of you, members can see the proposed site layout. We've got the sample easels as well as the proof of concept vehicle locations. In addition, there is further to, as there is a net gain in biodiversity on this site, another plan was submitted which provides fencing to protect where the net gain in biodiversity will be and ecological enhancement. And this also means that if any further applications come forward after this 3-year period, development would be restricted to this area due to the net gain that we have in biodiversity. So we've got some photos looking at the site, one looking down towards it from the Coomfield Road, looking across towards the MTC, again another towards the access to the site, and further in. Okay. In terms of the principal development, the application site is located within the West Midlands Greenbelt, and only where very special circumstances exist will development be permitted. Whilst located within the Greenbelt, the site is considered to be within a sustainable location, having appropriate levels of infrastructure and access routes, including public transport. The proposal seeks to support a nationally significant project for a 3-year period, after which will be returned to the Greenbelt. Taking into consideration the national significance of this development, it was considered that very special circumstances exist in this instance. In terms of the character and design, the proposal has been designed to ensure that elevations facing residential properties would be low-tone colour cladding. Any bright materials would be facing the MTC estates, ensuring limited impact on the street scene and the surrounding area. When factoring in the reduction in the openness, it was considered that due to the scale of the proposal balanced against the existing development within the application site, it would not have a materially adverse impact in terms of openness as a whole. Condition 2 also requires the site to be returned back to its former condition once the use has ceased. What members can see in front of them now is an example of one of the proof of concept research vehicles, the types of materials that can be expected to be seen on there. In terms of highway safety, the proposed development is not one which would generate a significant increase in car usage, and as such no parking has been proposed as part of this development. Car parking for the proposal would be provided within the car parks located within the existing MTC grounds, which is considered sufficient to accommodate any visitors to the site. Warwickshire County Council Highways have also confirmed that they have no objections to the proposals subject to condition 6. Other matters, there are no material adverse impacts for residential amenity, flood risk and drainage, landscaping, ecology, land contamination, archaeology and air quality. Moving to the planning balance, the proposal is an experimental project backed by central government into the future construction of materials. The location of the site means the operator would be able to capitalise on and create a synergy within the cluster of high technology industries, manufacturing, research and development already taking place in the area. The proposal would result in a biodiversity net gain and an enhanced landscaping scheme. The proposal would not have an adverse impact on highway safety and complies with local plan policies and the National Planning Policy Framework. The recommendation, therefore, is to approve subject to conditions and informatives. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Joe. Are there any speakers on this application? Councillor Gillius.
Yeah, I just want to give thanks to the Coomfields Parish Council because they always respond fully to any planning applications. I know that I ought to make this public that both the Chair and the Vice Chair have a briefing of this committee prior to this meeting, and the concerns that were raised by Coomfields Parish Council have been addressed, and I'm quite happy with this now, so it's I'll move approval.
Thank you, Councillor Gillius. Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Having been involved in the civil engineering industry and the profession for many years, this is involved with building and testing building products and so on. I can't see any reason why it can't be approved. Thank you to the officer for a good report. And I second Councillor Gillius' proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I very much welcome this. Following Grenfell and problems with high carbon production methods in the building industry, to start to see some change in design and construction that may bring forward low carbon, safer products into the housing market is to be welcomed. And I hope the next 3 years are successful.
I would fully agree with that, Councillor Sanderson, and I think we should be doing whatever we can to support the work that's going on at the MTC. Are there any further speakers on this application? No? Okay, so we've had approval proposed by Councillor Gillius and seconded by Councillor Lewis. Can I ask all those in favour to please raise their hands? I make that unanimous. Thank you very much. So I'd just like to thank Jo for her 3 presentations this evening. And as I said, we're going to take a short adjournment before we return for what is item 5 on the agenda, R21/1193, as item 4 has been postponed. IT, if you could adjourn the live stream, please. Thank you. Good evening again, everyone. So we now come to item 5 on the applications for consideration, and this is R21/1193 Noonhill Cottage, Grove Road, and this is with Sam Burbidge. Sam?
Noonhill Cottage, Grove Road, Anstey, and it's the full plan application for substantial alteration to the existing property at Noonhill Cottage to form a new larger dwelling. This is under application reference number R211193. This application has been reported to the Planning Committee in accordance with the scheme of delegation. The application has been called into the committee within the 21-day consultation period along with a request of a site visit. This request was made by Councillor Gillias on behalf of Anstey Parish Council. So, starting with the site location, the proposal site is located at the end of Grove Road in the rural village of Anstey. The red arrow here highlights the location of the dwelling, with the blue arrow identifying the main road going through the village. The property itself was formed as a result of the approval of an agricultural workers' dwelling in the early 1990s to serve the nearby Noonhill farm to the west. However, the current dwelling is now a separate unit in its own right. The front elevation of the dwelling faces away from the public highway and overlooks the substantial garden and surrounding greenbelt land to the south. The rear elevation faces towards Grove Road and the Oxford Canal. The site is also in close proximity to the M69 trunk road, which can be seen at the edge of the photo here. So in terms of the site photos, we have the front elevation here, which, as previously mentioned, faces away from Grove Road. The rear elevation fronts Grove Road. The top right here, we have the photo taken from the garden alongside 2 existing properties which are neighbouring and also contain a modern design like this application. And this final photo is taken towards the garden near the M69. So in terms of the proposed plans, there was a previous application on the site in the form of R210612, which proposed substantial alterations to the existing property along with the erection of a double-storey stable block and a reclassification of the land to entirely residential. Due to the objections this form application received and the difficulty it had complying with approved policy, this application was subsequently withdrawn by the applicant. Therefore, this current application was amended and submitted in the form of R211193 and aimed to alleviate the original concerns and proposes to create a new larger dwelling only, which can be seen in these photos. As you can see from the block plan in the top left, the proposed design will fit well into the existing plot. The proposed ease height is around 5.2 metres and the total height will be 8.8 metres, which is not too dissimilar to the current property. So in terms of the floor plans, the footprint will extend by circa 8.5 metres to the southwest elevation, which is just here. This is bordering the Noonhill farm. The opposing side, the front elevation will extend out by a smaller distance of 6.8 metres, just here. The side elevation facing in an eastern orientation has a maximum extension of circa 5 metres and can be seen just here. It will then wrap around to the front, as previously mentioned. A balcony is also proposed on the front elevation, which will serve master bedroom 1 and can be seen just here. This balcony will provide views over the garden area and has been designed in order to pose no impacts on the privacy and amenities of the neighbouring properties. A second balcony is also proposed for master bedroom 2 and will face northeast towards Grove Road. It can be seen just here. The existing dwelling comprises of red facing brickwork, dark concrete roof tiles and brown UPVC windows throughout. The new design proposes a modern architectural finish with the use of zinc roofing, red brickwork to match existing and elements of off-white render, with large aspects of glass on the facade of the dwelling, which can be seen on the previous slide here. So in terms of the consultation period, Warwickshire County Council Ecology offered no objections subject to informatives. Rugby Work Services offered no objection. Warwickshire County Highways Department offered no objection. National Highways also offered no objection subject to a pre-commencement condition. And for further clarity, this was listed as Highways England in the officer report. The Canal and River Trust also offered no objection. Anstey Parish Council originally objected, however this is now believed to be sorted with the main issues alleviated. Neighbouring comments to the scheme were that the proposed windows on the first floor would create impacts on privacy. The proposed wraparound balcony will also create impacts on privacy, and the design was considered overbearing on neighbouring properties. However, the amendments which were requested have now been hoped to alleviate these concerns. So moving on to the key issues, the principle of development. The property is located in the rural village of Anstey, where development will be permitted within the existing boundaries only, including the conversion of existing buildings. The proposal aims to redevelop the existing dwelling on the site. Whilst this design is not a common trend in the area, Grove Road contains a variety of dwelling types throughout. This application is therefore considered to be in accordance with policy GP1 and GP2 of the local plan and section 2 of the MPPF, due to the principle of development already being established. In terms of the highways considerations, the local plan states that a 5-bedroom house should provide a minimum of 3 off-road spaces. This is apparent on the site. National Highways also provided no objection, subject to a pre-commencement condition in the form of a construction environmental management plan. Therefore, this application is considered to be in accordance with local plan policy D2 and will not impact on highway safety. So moving on to the character and appearance. The proposal is considered a high-quality modern design which will improve the appearance of the existing dwelling. The proposal also aims to use suitable materials throughout. The development will add to the overall quality of the area and is considered in accordance with policy SDC1 of the local plan. This application is also in accordance with section 12 of the MPPF, with particular reference made to paragraph 130A, which states that developments will add to the overall quality of the area, and paragraph 130B, which emphasises that proposed buildings are attractive as a result of good architecture. In terms of the residential amenity, as previously mentioned, there were concerns from neighbours and the parish council as to the impact this original scheme would have. However, the amended proposal is now considered acceptable by the case officer due to the removal of aspects to the original scheme. This includes the amended balcony design on the southeast elevation, which now provides no looks or views into neighbouring properties. Number 2, the first floor windows in the side elevation have now either been removed or obscure glazed and will be conditioned to remain as such thereafter. And thirdly, the properties within the vicinity of the application site all benefit from south-facing gardens, therefore will all experience a large degree of sunlight throughout the day. Due to the amendments that have been made, the application is now considered in accordance with local plan policy SDC1. So in terms of the planning balance and recommendation, the proposal is considered to provide a substantial improvement to the nature of the existing dwelling through a scheme which comprises of a high quality modern design. Along with the works which are being carried out to the neighbouring properties of 102 and 104 Grove Road, this scheme will significantly improve the visual appearance of the immediate locality. Whilst the design is different to other dwellings in the vicinity, on balance there is no common trend or consistent architectural style on Grove Road, and the application site is located a considerable distance away from the centre of the village. The issues of privacy have now been alleviated, and the current proposal in this application is considered an acceptable improvement to the previous application on the site. And finally, there's the principle that the development will not impact on highway safety. Therefore, the officer's recommendation is approval subject to conditions and informatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question of clarification to the officer, please. Earlier on in the presentation, you mentioned, Sam, that there was a agricultural tie on the property. Has that actually been removed?
So in terms of where the dwelling is, the actual footprint of the building, that is classed as residential and part of the Grove Road residential area. However, the garden is still classified as agricultural. However, none of the development is impacted to the garden area. It's purely in the residential area of the footprint. Fine,
thank you for that clarification. And I have to say that given the fact that a lot of the objections have been removed, I'm inclined to move for approval of that application.
Thank you, Councillor Eccleston. Councillor Gillies.
Yeah, first of all, I've got to thank Sam for the site visit today. Most full explanation there was given, and along with the chairman there, to give us a bit of an insight into the proposal. Because when you're actually standing in the garden at the back there, you see what it's going to look like in the when it's all built out. I know the structure will be probably something like 100% bigger than it is at the moment, but it gives us quite a positive picture, and I've got a second approval.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. Councillor Rabin.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question regarding the parking provision. Again, sorry, I didn't quite catch how many vehicles it was allowing for.
So yeah, the proposed property will have the same amount of bedrooms as current, and there'll be no impacts on the parking provisions as currently presented. So, yeah, there'll be sufficient parking spaces provided, which is 3 for 5 bedrooms.
3. And is there any plans, because I can't see them, to install electric vehicle charging?
There hasn't been any presented, no.
No, okay. Thank you.
Okay. As Councillor Gillies said, this was a particularly interesting one to do a site visit on, because it put the proposals in context, particularly in line with the existing developments that are there, and sort of bringing that into the character, which I think I hadn't fully appreciated, especially as unfortunately Google Maps was rather out of date at the time. So it was useful to go there and see it in its current presentation. Councillor Lewis?
It's just a clarification point, really. I haven't been able to indicate, I haven't been able to see anywhere where the access is, the drive into the property.
The access into the property will remain as currently presented. It will be the same as it is at the moment for the property. It's purely just the footprint of the property which is being expanded as such.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to come on the site visit today. Can you show on one of the diagrams you have?
Yeah.
We'll bring that up in one moment.
Sorry, yeah. So, as you can see from this photo, roads, and it will remain as existing. It goes onto a front driveway, which I believe can accommodate about 2 cars, and it's hard tarmacked. And then there's like a side road that goes round to the front elevation of the property here, which faces away from Grove Road. And as Councillor Picker will agree, there was a large area of tarmac in this area. But yeah, the access will remain the same.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, if there are no further comments or questions on this one, we have approval moved by Councillor Eccleston and seconded by Councillor Gillies. Can I ask all those in favour to please raise their hands? I make that unanimous, so that is approved. So we'll now come which is R21/0954, Rugby Museum and Art Gallery, and this is again with Sam.
Yeah, sorry, different Sam.
Oh, sorry, different Sam. So we'll be back in one moment. Okay, so this is R21/0954, Rugby Museum and Art Gallery, and this is with Sam Green.
Good afternoon. This application seeks full planning permission for the extension of the existing short lattice mast on the Rugby Art Gallery and Museum. This application is being reported to Planning Committee in accordance with paragraph 5.2.3f, which refers to applications submitted by or on behalf of the Council. Although the applicant for the proposal is not Rugby Borough Council, the application site is the Rugby Art Gallery and Museum, and in confirmation by the Council's Corporate Property Officer, the building is in ownership by the Council. The rationale behind the proposal is to replace the service from Round Gardens, which is to be demolished and will serve Capital FM, NHS and MOD radio paging, Rugby First and Rugby Town Centre CCTV. To the right is an image of the existing mast in place. As previously stated, the application site is Rugby Art Gallery and Museum, which is in the conservation area of Rugby Town Centre. And the application site is situated off of Little Elborough Street and is opposed by car parking and the Asda Superstore. The proposal site is bordered by both Drury Lane and to the opposing side Corporation Street, and to the rear the A426 and the Rugby School conservation area. Here are the proposed plans. To the right is the sketch image provided by the agent, and to the left an image which demonstrates what the proposed mast will look like. I've added an additional red line to show the extension above. The proposal adds an additional 6 metre slimline guide lattice mast, which is 18 centimetres width, which is the same width as the existing mast, and will take that height of that section to 12 metres. Above this, there would be a narrow antenna added at 2 metres in height, which is much narrower than the main body at only 10 millimetres in diameter, and the guide wires to be used will be very narrow at 4 millimetres. All of the above will be painted sky blue. The application would be within the Rugby urban area and therefore in accordance with policy GP2. The application is also within the conservation area of Rugby Town. Therefore, the principle of development is only acceptable if the proposal preserves and enhances the conservation area. In terms of character and design, the design is of small scale and the appearance is functional and therefore of utilitarian appearance. Due to the site within the conservation area, the impact of the character is to be explored from various viewpoints further within this presentation. Chapter 10 of the MPPF, paragraph 115, states that the number of radio and electronic communications masts and the sites for such installations should be kept to a minimum consistent with needs. The use of existing masts, buildings and other structures for new electronic communication should be encouraged, and equipment should be sympathetically designed and camouflaged where appropriate. As previously stated, the proposal would provide a number of services and would be an extension of an existing mast, as well as of a small scale and camouflage in a sky blue colour scheme. The proposal can therefore be considered in line with Chapter 10 of the MPPF. So no public objections were received. Environmental Health were consulted to assess any impacts of the proposal and took a stance of no objection. The technical consultee did recommend that a document be provided demonstrating compliance with the relevant International Commission on Non-Ionising Radiation Protection and Ofcom. The information was received by the Council on the 27th of January, and the development will be conditioned to be completed in accordance with this information as part of any decision notice. So I'll now demonstrate potential impacts from the proposal from a number of viewpoints. The mast is only currently visible on Drury Lane through the visual break in between Prince of Wales and 6 Drury Lane, which can be seen on the right. And the image on the left shows Drury Lane, and from the users, the proposal will be entirely screened by the buildings on either side. Therefore, the proposal will have minimal impact. From the viewpoint leaving the Swan Centre, the mast can be readily seen, which is circled in red, and therefore the impact of this proposal is only that of an extension of an existing feature. Due to the chosen scale and colour of the proposed mast, it has been considered that the proposal would be acceptable and would not be significantly detrimental to this particular viewpoint or the design of Rugby Art Gallery. The users of Lawrence Sheriff Street would be screened from the proposal by the existing buildings, and therefore there would be no impact from the proposal. The existing mast is barely visible but does begin to appear above the ridgeline of the buildings on Lawrence Sheriff Street from a southern direction on the A426 towards Dunchurch Road. The image on the left highlights the extreme difficulty to see the mast from the distance, in which the figure on the right shows a zoomed-in image confirming that the mast does appear above the ridgeline, circled in red. To note, when the officer completed the site visit, they could not see the mast. It is therefore accepted that the increase in height within this proposal would likely make the mast more visible above the ridgeline. However, the visibility points would be distanced away from the site and therefore greatly reducing the prominence of the proposal, which is of a small scale. This proposal then becomes screened again by the buildings on Lawrence Sheriff Street at closer distances. The one-way system in operation for road users means they would be unlikely to view the proposal as prominent as it is to the rear of the direction of traffic. Therefore, the impact has been determined to not cause significant harm to this viewpoint within the conservation area. The mast currently can be seen from Corporation Street at various points, but is largely screened by buildings for users of Corporation Street. In this assessment, the proposed increase in height from this viewpoint would not be seen as significantly detrimental due to the screening by the buildings. The only other matter is that a condition is added requiring the removal of the proposed mast in the event of the proposal becoming surplus to requirement to avoid any unnecessary impact on visual amenity. In conclusion, the proposal is of acceptable scale and design for its purpose and would be in accordance with policy GP2 of the local plan. An assessment into the impact of the proposal from various viewpoints has been made, and from this assessment, the proposal has been determined to cause less than substantial harm to the conservation area, and therefore, when weighted against public benefit, is considered acceptable. The mast provides a replacement service for a mast to be removed and would use an existing mast site in line with national policy and in turn creates a net decrease of one mast. This application has received no objection from Environmental Health and therefore, on balance, it is of recommendation that this proposal should be approved subject to conditions. Thank you.
I think this is clearly a case of replacing an existing piece of equipment with something new. It will continue to retain a service that we need, and I'm satisfied that everything that can be done to mitigate it has been done, so I'm happy to move approval from the chair on this one. Councillor Sanderson.
Yeah, question for the officer. I don't think it's going to have any impact on the former St Matthew's Church, which is a Grade 2 listed building, which sits to the forefront of that. But the St Matthew's Street itself, which is not Lawrence Sheriff Street, it's St Matthew's Street, we've recently given planning permission for the warehousing and the building and the first floor buildings to be converted into residential accommodation. Is there likely to be any effect on the residential accommodation? And will residents be advised?
Could I just ask that in terms of the impact, are you referring to a view or emissions?
Emissions.
So as far as Environmental Health were concerned, there was no, they had no objection to the proposal, as well as the information which was submitted, which is in compliance with the Ionising Commission. Because it's a radio mast also, I believe there is licensing issues that come in place which are regulated by Ofcom as well.
Yeah, it's just, Chair, I'm a bit concerned that those dwellings will not be occupied yet, and therefore there would be no opportunity to be consulted on that application.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Eccleston.
Chair, my industry. So I can reassure Councillor Sanderson that the officer is absolutely right. With Ofcom, etc., the frequencies used from such masts have no detrimental effect to people within the near vicinity of those masts. You can actually almost stand alongside it and not suffer any kind of detrimental effect to your health whatsoever. It's a standard RF mast. And also, can I just say that I agree, and I would second you, Chair. It's a no-brainer in terms of the requirement for it. A 6-metre extension, for the benefit councillors here, is the height of a tall traffic signal pole. 4 metres and 6 metres are the two traffic signal heights, just to give you an idea of the additional height of this particular mast. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Eccleston. Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, thanks very much. In view of the very high winds that we seem to be ever more frequently being exposed to, is there any consideration given to whether there's any danger if it was affected by wind and collapsed?
This isn't mentioned in any of the supporting information. I'm guessing that the addition of the guidelines which have been put forward as part of this proposal, which don't serve the existing match, which is shorter, I'm guessing they're put in place to fight any sort of weather conditions and any impact that an additional height could cause on the structure.
Okay, thanks. I noticed actually quite interesting you did try to find alternative locations, and none of them were suitable. So.
That was done separate to the planning process and was done by the applicant prior to the submission. I believe it was the Rugby CMEX building, and there was a chimney chosen. Just in terms of those, that would be adding an additional mast. National policy suggests that it's more beneficial to use the existing mast and add that on.
Okay, thanks.
So I had Councillor Eccleston and then Councillor Daly.
Thanks. Again, declaring an interest in this from an industry perspective, just to reassure Councillor Lewis that whenever a new mast is proposed and designed, windage is one of the major factors that's taken into consideration, hence the stays which come down from the mast. And the windage calculations are, in my view, actually quite excessive these days from a safety perspective. So hopefully that will reassure Councillor Lewis.
Slightly.
Councillor Daly.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say that I would second approval. I think they've taken consideration. I wasn't sorry. Has it already been seconded? Sorry. Right. Thank you. I will be supporting Councillor Picker and Councillor Eccleston then in approving this.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. Are there any other comments or questions on this one? No. Okay, so that has been proposed for approval by myself and seconded by Councillor Eccleston. Can I ask committee members to indicate if they support that? Thank you very much. I make that approved unanimously again. So we will now come to the last application for consideration this evening, which is going to be R21/1165, and this is with Chris Kingham, I believe. So we will be back in one moment. Okay, so as I said, this is R21/1165, Rolls-Royce Anstey Aerodrome, Coomfields Road, and this is with Chris Kingham. Chris, over to you.
From a Rolls-Royce site at Anstey. It's a full planning application for the erection of 3 commercial units for flexible use within use classes B2 and B8. The proposal includes a primary access off Anstey Business Park. So that's down through here. So the application site itself is in this location, and the primary route of access would be through Anstey Business Park along the Central Boulevard here. So this is an aerial view of the site, just for context. So you can see the rough area of the site edged in red here. You can see Anstey Business Park in this location, and on this you can see the former Rolls-Royce site. So you can see the former buildings and hard standings associated with that. The site's in the green belt, so you can see it's open land, predominantly agricultural land that surrounds the building. And you have Coombe Abbey here, and you have the area of Coventry just to the edge here beyond the A46. So in terms of what the site looks like on the ground, there's a couple of pictures on screen here for you to see. You can see this is a view standing from Coomfields Road, looking towards the site. You can see in this picture the buildings of Cadent Gas, who have recently had a new development and construction on the site. Here you can see their offices in this area and the multi-use car park. And also you can see in the background there, that's MTC at Anstey Business Park. And the site is obviously this area of land in the foreground between those units and the road. There's another view looking this time in a southerly direction. So you've got the existing Rolls-Royce buildings that remain on site in this location, and the proposed buildings will be built in front of that. So this hopefully provides a bit of a clearer view. These two photos at the bottom of the screen, you can see here this is that MTC building and the Cadent multi-storey car park and the existing Rolls-Royce buildings. As you can see, the site's fairly clear now and free of development and is largely overgrown. So in terms of the actual site itself, this is the proposed layout. So you can see there's two buildings that would be constructed, and this is one unit, and then there's 2 units here. So that would form one unit in this area, and then there would be a dividing wall with another unit provided here, just to the south of the site. Access would come in through the site here, and provide access to servicing and car parking to the fronts of those buildings. You can see there that there's an attenuation pond that's already in place, and there's an area that's allocated for landscaping in this location here, and Coomfield Road itself runs up in this location. So in terms of how the buildings would appear, you can see on the screen elevations of Unit 1B. As you can see, it's very just industrial in its nature by virtue of its use, but they have added interest to the corner of the building where the ancillary offices would be located. And you can see the proposed elevations for Unit 1B2 and 1B3 on screen now. So again, it follows the same style and appearance as Unit 1B1. So you have the industrial units with on the corners, flanked on each corner, some ancillary offices with higher levels of glazing. So in terms of the key issues that members need to consider, obviously the key one here is that the site is in the Greenbelt, and any proposed development like this in the Greenbelt is classified as being inappropriate. And there is harm to the Greenbelt by virtue of the impact on openness, because you're obviously going to have buildings in an area that's currently free from development. There would also be limited and moderate harm to 2 of the 5 purposes of including land in the Greenbelt, and all of that harm attracts substantial weight against the development. In line with national policy on Greenbelt, the proposal should therefore not be approved except in very special circumstances. In that regard, one of the critical factors that needs to be considered in this instance is that the application site actually falls within the site boundary of the outline planning permission that was recently granted, and also a approval of reserved matters application that was approved just last year. So there's an outline application that covers the site for redevelopment for B2 purposes, and then this reserved matters application has come forward and been approved pursuant to the outline permission for the B2 use of these buildings. So the critical factor is that the proposal conforms with the parameters for both development and landscape matters in the outline permission. So the outline permission set a limit on the height of the buildings above ground level, and the proposed development is well within those limits. And critically, the proposal is the same layout, size and design of the units which were approved for the Reserve Matters application. So you can see on the screen here, this was the Reserve Matters approval, and you can see the building Unit 1B1 and Unit 1B2 and 3 here. And you can see that the proposal for this current application is identical in terms of that layout, and the buildings themselves are also of the same style and appearance. So the only real thing that's actually changing, the only difference, if you like, is that the Reserve Matters application granted the use of those buildings to be used for B2 purposes, but this permission allows it to be used for B2 and B8 uses under a flexible use class. So in terms of the principle of employment development at this site, policy ED1 of our local plan sets out that the application site is suitable for redevelopment for B2 and B8 uses. The intensification of development across the site, so obviously they've demolished the majority of the buildings that were owned by Rolls-Royce previously and have set out a plan to redevelop those. The amount of redevelopment would be greater than what was on the site previously, but that intensification helps to meet the borough's need for employment land in this location. The proposal also has some economic benefits, so it's a substantial investment in the borough and the wider region. It would result in new jobs, up to potentially 322 new workers, and it also have benefits for indirect jobs that would support those units. It also capitalises and builds upon the success of both Anstey Business Park and Prospero Anstey, and it supports construction jobs and businesses within the borough. So one of the key things we need to consider is the impact on the landscape and visual amenity of the area. So as I've already stated, the site is currently predominantly just hard standing and open grassland. But the proposal represents a continuation of the redevelopment of the Rolls-Royce site that's already commenced at this location. Now, in order to facilitate development here, there would be a need to create a large single-level platform for buildings. So that results in a need to do some cut and fill earthworks to create a level plateau upon which to put the development units and associated hard standing, such as for car parking and the access roads. The building itself would be 16.5 metres high, and it would be visible from Coomfields Road and land to the east in particular. In terms of how that compares to other development in the area, we have MTC and Cadent. So MTC is the building located here, and Cadent is located in this part of the site. Those buildings there are up to 19 metres high. And you also have Meggitt to the immediate south of the site. That has a height of 13.7 metres. Now factor in the varying levels across the site, because levels rise up from Coomfields Road towards the west into the site. So factoring in those levels, the ridge height of this proposed unit would actually be 6 metres less than MTC. So that's this area here. It would be 3.5 metres less than that for Cadent, and it would just be 0.5 metre higher than the Meggitt development, which is located to this area of the site. Now, in order to mitigate against that visual impact and the prominence that would otherwise occur in the landscape and wider views, it's proposed to provide a significant amount of strategic landscape planting along the eastern boundary. So that's where you can see now on screen where the cursor is. So that would include some substantial tree planting and also shrub planting to really screen up the edge of the site. There would also be some areas of on-plot landscaping to further help soften the views of the building. So the impact, as I've already stated, is predominantly from highways, footpaths and residential dwellings. But importantly, this building would not be seen in isolation. It would be seen within the context of existing buildings that surround this site. So those are some of the ones I've mentioned, including MTC and Cadent and Megit. And critically, we feel that the impact will diminish over time as planting establishes. So the impact on the landscape and visual amenities of the area is, on balance, considered to be acceptable in the medium to long term. So turning to traffic flows and highway safety, the critical thing to note here is that the Rolls-Royce site, when that was fully operational, was actually only accessed directly onto Coomfields Road only, so there was no access onto the wider road network other than by going onto Coomfields Road and then travelling through the surrounding villages. So that's actually changed through the construction of the Megit building, which is this building to the south of the site. When that building was constructed a few years ago now, the developers for that site put in a new spine road that actually links the site here and goes into the Anstey Business Park highway network. So you can see that the red line there shows the extent of that network, and that links into the wider strategic road network, including the M6, M69 and A46. And there's also still secondary access just onto Coomfields Road. So the proposal would utilise this new spine road and would also include provisions for a new access onto Coomfields Road to the south of the site. So that's shown here. So this is the Megit building for context, and the spine road essentially goes down and around and out onto Coomfields Road. That would be a signalised access, and that's secured by condition 16 outlined on the agenda. So in terms of whether that's acceptable or not, we've consulted both Highways England and also Warwickshire County Council and Coventry City Council, and there have been no objections to the highway implications of this scheme subject to conditions. So the few critical ones are highlighted on the screen here. So there would be an M6 Junction 2 improvement scheme. So that would require some signalisation and changes to line markings on the roundabout at that junction. There'd also be a need for a freight management plan, and that would be overseen by a transport steering group that would need to be created. Critically, I think is really important, particularly to the parish council, is that there would be no HGV access onto Coomfields Road. So that's controlled by condition 17 on the agenda. A travel plan is also proposed to be secured by condition, and that would promote the shift to sustainable transport, and particularly the utilisation of things like cycling and bus services that will be established. So the traffic flows that have been modelled for this amended use, so this is for the allowance of a B8 use class in addition to B2 uses, are actually within the permitted limits of what's been modelled for the actual outline permission that just focused on B2 uses. So essentially there would be no greater net impact on vehicular movements to and from the site as a result of this proposal to allow for the B8 use in addition to the B2. So the conclusion is that there would be no severe highway impacts, and the development is therefore acceptable in this regard. In terms of heritage matters, the scale and location of this development is such that there would be no adverse impact on the nearby heritage assets, particularly at Coombe Abbey. There's a lot of intervening buildings, there's substantial landscape planting that has already been provided along the southern boundary of the site, and there's further more to come as part of the outline permission as well. And so we feel that this building would not be readily visible from those views. And I think also as well, we just wanted to make the point that the outline and reserve matters approval that's already been granted on this site provides a fallback position for buildings of the same size and layout as what's proposed under this now full planning application. Lighting was a key concern of the parish council, and in that regard, the developer has submitted a lighting strategy and lighting layout plans which specifically look at this issue. So those lighting plans have been designed in line with national lighting guidance and industry standards. The lighting would be 0-degree tilt angled, and we would have condition 24 to control the use of those lights by photocell and time clocks where possible. And the resulting benefit of all that is that it will help to minimise light spill and glare and sky glow in the evening when the lighting is obviously on. We've consulted Environmental Health on the proposals. They are satisfied that the lighting has been kept to the minimum necessary for the uses and wouldn't cause issues at neighbouring residential properties or in the wider area. Condition 24 also requires approval of any changes to the lighting or any additional lighting that people may want to install at a future date. So there's a wide range of other issues which are detailed in the report before you. I won't go into those details, but it's suffice to say there's no detrimental impact for each of the issues that are identified on screen here. And we've got a range of conditions which have been employed to ensure that where potential impacts could arise, they're mitigated fully to ensure that the impact would be acceptable. In terms of the planning balance, the proposal would cause harm to the green belt and therefore should not be approved except in very special circumstances. There are economic benefits to the scheme, and we consider that these are very substantial weight in favour of the development. There are also a number of social benefits arising from the development, which attracts very substantial weight in favour of the scheme. The potential environmental impacts have been identified, and conditions would be used to ensure that any adverse impacts would be mitigated. Overall, we feel that there are very special circumstances that exist to justify development in this greenbelt location. It's particularly important to have regard to the fallback position that, aside from this proposal that's before us now, the developer could construct the same units and just use it for B2 purposes. So in terms of the actual impact on the greenbelt, we feel it's no greater than what could already be built under that existing reserve matters permission. Overall, we feel that the development does comply with the development plan and therefore constitutes sustainable development. The recommendation is therefore one of approval as set out on the agenda and subject to just a change to condition 8 and the wording of that. So rather than it saying no above ground development shall commence until the measures for summer overheating are approved, it would be changed to say no above ground development beyond the erection of the steel frames to the units hereby approved shall commence. And condition, informative 12 that's suggested here relates to condition 24 and the external lighting. Essentially acknowledges that the proposal is for 24-hour usage of the units and that external illumination may therefore be required at all times. But what we're asking for is for them to consider the specific operations and running of those businesses when the occupiers move in and looking at opportunities to reduce and control any obtrusive lighting where it's identified that there could be potential issues. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Gillies first, then Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you very much. I just want to remind some of the members on the Planning Committee that when outline permission was sought on the sites, well, quite some years ago now, the access out onto Coomfields Road was going to be purely for emergency purposes only. And that is because of the overbearing nature of traffic on the little roads that are in existence in the Coomfields parish. Now, I know we've had conditions to deal with the HGV of using Coomfields Road, but we've still got issues with the workers. We've just been seeing that we're going to be producing something like 322 jobs there. So those are going to have to get into the site somehow. And as with the first application we had tonight, they've got to go through little roads, which are not designed to run high volumes of traffic. Now, I'm just wondering whether or not we could have, and I'm referring now to Peter Hall Lane and Smeaton Lane, which are really hotspot rat running roads. So I'm just wondering whether we can have some informative or a form of condition that prior to occupation of the site, we could make sure that we've got something in place that workers would respect the nature of the lanes in the area and try to keep off them. I don't know if we can sort of formalise that in a way, but people do live in the area and they want to be able to live a reasonable life. When roads are suddenly turned into motorways for half an hour each end of the day, then you're in trouble. I'm just wondering how the other members of the committee will respond to that, or even support me. But other than that, I'd like to move approval.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Gillius. Does anyone want to come back on the potential informative before I go to Councillor Sanderson?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The potential for an informative is absolutely fine, and I think it could be linked into the travel plan for the site. So there's an opportunity to work with the county, in particular, to look at ways to encourage that shift. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll just say Coomfields Parish Council will formally give you a gold star for that. Well done.
I will settle for approval. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to second the application. This is good use of a former brownfield site. Even though it is close to the green belt, it has brought a new employment site back to the borough. I dare say Coventry will claim it, but it brings it back to the borough. With 30 conditions and 12, is it now 13 informatives. We also congratulate the officer on the quality of the work that we've seen before us tonight. And so I'll take my hat off to him. Well done. And I hope we can see many more reports like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson, and I would agree with that. Are there any further speakers on this application? Okay, so just to confirm, we have approval proposed by Councillor Gillius, subject to an additional informative relating to Peter Hall Lane and Smeaton Lane, which we're happy to delegate to the officer to draft the wording of, and that's been seconded by Councillor Sanderson. Okay, can I ask all those in favour of approval to raise their hands? And for the sixth and final time this evening, I make that unanimous, so thank you very much, Chris. So that application is approved. We now come to agenda item 5, which is applications for site visits. Richard, have there been any applications for site visits?
No further ones, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item 6, which is delegated decisions to note. Okay, excellent. So we now come to agenda item 7, which is a motion to exclude the public under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972. That under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following item on the grounds it involves the likely disclosure of information defined in paragraph 2 of section 12A of the Act. I will move that from the chair. May I ask for a seconder?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies.